of God, our Creator, Redeemer, and Sanctifier. Amen. I don't think it's just a guy thing. I think women do this too, or all people do this. Building forts. How many of you ever built a fort? Yeah, it goes across the board. And making some sort of little place when I was a kid was really important to me. I built places in the attic. I built places under bushes, in snowdrifts, little places that I dug out and created as little burrows, little safe places. I dug holes in the ground. I went under trees, up in trees, built platforms, all sorts of things. And one time, through one period of my life, I had friends, two different friends, who joined me in going out in the middle of the woods somewhere. We felt very far away, we really weren't, but we went off in the woods and we found broken sticks and stuff, and we created an enclosure in the middle of this, area that wasn't a home, but we created home. Do you know that instinct to sort of create home in the middle of a wilderness? Well, we hear a lot about that in Isaiah, particularly this morning, and even in writing to the Thessalonians, Paul's saying, rejoice in all things. It's sort of like make home wherever you are. Make some place. And my friends and I weren't escaping something of devastation and trying to make something safe. It wasn't like home was that bad. But there was this instinct about trying to create something that's our own. And it was the satisfaction of taking a bunch of broken sticks and creating an enclosure. It's like, oh, this is a mess, and now suddenly it's a place. And let's bring some furniture in and sort of create a place. And it was a place that we could sleep out in, and it was our own. Some of you may have known that joy, and it's sort of pre-camping, but it was a fun thing. And for all of us, I think there is this longing to find home in the middle of wilderness. And for some of us right now, things can feel, at this time of year and with the things that have been happening in our little congregation, like there's a bit of a wilderness going on. Don't quite know where we are. Things have been sort of tending towards devastation in certain ways. And it's like, wow, how do we make home in the middle of this? How do we rejoice always, in the middle of things where there's change and there's stuff that's just not it's not how we had hoped it would be. And indeed, I think for all of us, there's this idea that life goes from A to B to C to D, and we're constantly trying to make sense of it so that it's linear. And we can sort of see where life is going, and we have this sort of security that, oh, I know how life's going to be. And then it just isn't that way. I mean, again and again, it sort of goes, whoop. And John, the Gospel of John, was so perfect for that sort of experience, because as we heard today in the Gospels, the Pharisees go wanting answers, and they don't get them. They say, well, who are you? Are you the Messiah? No. Are you Elijah? No. Are you that prophet? No. Well, then who are you? I'm the one baptizing. I'm the one in the wilderness. And why are you baptizing? Why are you doing that? And he's not giving them clear answers. Because those were sort of key words they were using, The Messiah, there was a whole script about who the Messiah was, who Elijah is, and, who the prophet was. And John's just not fitting into their categories. And that wasn't comfortable for them. And it's not comfortable for us when things just aren't lining up with the familiar, with what we're comfortable with how we want things to be going. We want things to be sort of tied down and buttoned. And it's natural enough. I mean, we all need a certain degree of security and sense of how things actually work. But life keeps unfolding in a way that presents us with the unfamiliar, presents us with the uncomfortable, presents us with what we're really not prepared for. And so then we are thrown into a place like these guys coming up against John the Baptist, where they're just not getting their answers. And they're not getting some clarity right away. And yet God's in the midst doing something brand new. And this was all the prelude to Jesus coming forward and presenting himself in the world. So, sometimes when things get upended for us, it's the prelude to a new understanding of who Jesus is and how Jesus is with us in our lives. Particularly at times and in places where things are just not as we would hope them to be, where life isn't moving from A to B to C, where things are just so unfamiliar and seemingly untethered. And so being together as a community when there's loss and when there's change, for us individually or corporately, there is the sense that we find comfort, which isn't so much or not only soothing, but it's the strength to carry on. Comfort really has to do with discovering strength in ourselves to be with things as they really are. Even though they're unfamiliar, even though it's not what we wanted, even though it's not what we predicted or what we were prepared for, that we find the strength to be with it nonetheless. And we find that corporately, and eventually, if we're fortunate and by God's grace, we find that in ourselves more and more, that we can just be with life as it actually is. That life doesn't have to be the way we want it to be. That we can be with life as it is. And we can say with some sense of integrity, not my will, but yours be done. With some sense that God is giving us what we need, even though it may not be what we want or what we were prepared for, what we thought was going to be happening. And that becomes then a security, a trust, that God is doing within us what really needs to be done. That God's holding all things, supporting all things, being with us in all things. And then it begins to make some sense that Paul could write to the Thessalonians, rejoice in all things. Because there's this sense of security that whatever happens, we're safely in the hands of God. That there's support within us. And until we get to that place, we're with others and together we carry on and support one another when things don't connect from A to B to C. When things unfold in a way that we didn't really want. When things hurt and we feel the loss. And we're confused and we don't know what's going on. That we can support one another through that. And that we find the support of the communion, being together around this table, that allows us to be fed and nourished, symbolically but actually too, in terms of registering that Christ is among us, touching our lives, and upholding us at times that feel unsteady. So we're not a people that lose heart, but we're a vulnerable people because we are people who feel into life as it really is. More and more we're being supported and being with life as it actually is and letting go of what we think it should be. And that's a tough transition. You know, it's a tough transition. But that's where God manifests. The Pharisees had an idea of how life should be. And they didn't get what they really wanted, but they got what they needed, which was Jesus being born among them. So I feel like we need to trust God right now to be giving us what we need, even though we're not getting or haven't gotten what we wanted, and that we've been hurt by what has happened among us. Because there's been loss and transition that we didn't hope for, that we weren't prepared for. So at this Advent time, be prepared, be alert, be looking for Christ to manifest in your heart and life and among us in a new way. Because God has not abandoned us. God, like sending John the Baptist into the world, is preparing us for something new. Even though we're not getting the answers we want all the time, We are being prepared for what we truly need.